The research vessel Harmony's Edge drifted through the cold darkness of space like a wounded bird. Captain Kethva stood on the bridge watching the stars through the main viewing screen, while her crew worked desperately to fix their dying ship. The elegant vessel had been designed by the finest engineers of the Zalari Federation, and it looked more like a living thing than a machine with its smooth curves and bioorganic hull that seemed to breathe in the starlight. Everything had been going perfectly until 3 hours ago when their main engine suddenly died without warning. Science Officer Morden had been collecting samples from a beautiful nebula when the ship's power systems began failing one by one. Now they were trapped in an empty region of space with no way to get home, and their life support systems were slowly shutting down. Kethva watched her crew with growing concern as they moved around the bridge with quiet efficiency. The Zalari were a peaceful people who had never known war or conflict, and they faced this crisis with the same calm determination they brought to all their scientific work. Her botanist Telmos was trying to reroute power from the laboratory systems while Communications Officer Veltar worked to boost their signal range with parts from the food preparation units. The captain's large eyes reflected the soft blue light from the control panels as she considered their options. The Zalari had been exploring space for thousands of years, but they had always stayed close to their own territory, where help was never more than a few days away. This time they had ventured too far into unknown space, and now they were paying the price for their curiosity. Veltar looked up from his communication station with worry clear on his gentle features. The fur on his head had turned pale gray from stress, and his long fingers trembled slightly as he worked. He was young for a communications officer, and this was his first deep space mission. But he had been chosen for his brilliant mind and his ability to learn new languages. Quickly, Captain, the emergency beacon is ready, but I must warn you that we are very far from any Federation ships, Veltar said in the musical language of his people. The nearest patrol vessel is at least 2 weeks away, and our life support will fail in less than 4 days. Kethva nodded slowly as she processed this information. She had hoped they might be closer to help, but she was not surprised by the news. They had been pushing deeper into unexplored space than any Zalari expedition had gone before, and they all knew the risks when they volunteered for this mission. Send the distress. Call on all emergency frequencies, she ordered. Perhaps there are other species in this region who might help us even if they are not part of the Federation. Veltar's fingers danced across his control panel as he prepared the standard distress message that was used throughout known space. The message was simple and direct, as all emergency communications needed to be clear to any species that might receive them. Federation research vessel requesting immediate assistance, he transmitted. Hull breach imminent and 27 souls aboard require rescue. Our position is being transmitted with this message, and we will continue broadcasting until our power fails. The message went out in all directions at the speed of light, carrying their desperate plea into the vast emptiness of space. Kethva knew that the chances of anyone receiving their call were very small, but it was their only hope of survival. Meanwhile, many light years away, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching his fleet conduct training exercises in the darkness between the stars. The massive carrier was the pride of Earth's Navy, and it bristled with weapons and armor that had been forged in humanity's endless conflicts. 5 ships made up Morrison's task force, and each one was designed for war against humanity's many enemies. Morrison was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat in his 40 years of military service. He had fought in the colonial wars and the Martian Rebellion, and he carried the scars of those battles both on his body and in his mind. But he was also known throughout the fleet as a man who cared deeply about his people and would never leave anyone behind. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes sat at the communications station, monitoring the training exercise and coordinating between the different ships in the fleet. She was young but experienced and had earned Morrison's trust through her quick thinking and steady nerves under pressure. Her job was to make sure all 5 ships could work together as a single fighting unit. The Liberty's bridge was a stark contrast to the organic beauty of the alien research vessel. Everything was built for function rather than form, with hard angles and military efficiency taking precedence over comfort. The crew wore dark blue uniforms and moved with the precise discipline that came from years of training and combat experience. Hayes was adjusting the communication frequencies when she noticed something unusual on her screens. A signal was coming through on one of the emergency bands, but it was not from any human ship. The transmission was weak and distorted by distance, but it was definitely artificial, and seemed to be repeating the same message over and over. "Admiral, I'm picking up what appears to be a distress call," Hayes reported. "The signal is not human, but it's using some kind of universal mathematical language that I think I can decode." Morrison turned from the tactical display where he had been watching his destroyers practice attack formations. His weathered face showed immediate interest as he moved to stand behind Hayes at her station. "Can you make out what they're saying?" he asked. Hayes worked quickly, with her translation programs trying to decode the alien message. The mathematics were simple enough, and seemed to be based on universal constants that any intelligent species would recognize. Slowly the meaning became clear. "It's definitely a distress call, sir," she said. "Someone's ship is dying and they need immediate help. I count 27 life forms aboard and they say their life support is failing." Morrison looked at the star charts showing their current position and the source of the alien signal. They were conducting exercises in a remote sector far from any human colonies, but apparently they were not alone in this part of space. "How far away are they?" Morrison asked. "About 6 hours at maximum speed, sir," Hayes replied. "Should I try to establish communication?" Morrison did not hesitate, even though he knew they might be flying into a trap or making first contact with a hostile alien species. In his long military career, he had learned that sometimes the right thing to do was also the dangerous thing to do. "Signal all ships to change course immediately," he ordered. "We have people in trouble, and we're going to help them regardless of what species they are." The human fleet moved through space like a pack of steel wolves racing toward their prey. Admiral Morrison had ordered all 5 ships to maximum speed, and now the massive vessels cut through the darkness with their engines burning bright blue flames behind them. The USS Liberty led the formation, with her 4 escort ships spread out in a protective pattern around the carrier. Commander Rick Davis stood on the bridge of the destroyer USS Freedom watching the tactical displays as they approached the coordinates of the alien distress call. Davis was a veteran of 3 major space battles, and he knew how to read the signs when something was not quite right. His ship was armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and his crew was ready for anything. "Contact on sensor, sir," reported his tactical officer. "I'm reading one vessel approximately 2 kilometers in length. Hull appears to be organic in nature, and I'm detecting massive structural damage." Davis studied the image that appeared on his main screen and felt his breath catch in his throat. The alien ship was nothing like anything he had ever seen before. Where human vessels were all angles and armor plating, this ship looked like it had grown rather than been built. Its smooth curves reminded him of pictures he had seen of deep-sea creatures from Earth's oceans. "Any signs of weapons?" Davis asked his weapons officer. "Negative, sir. I'm not reading anything that looks like weapons systems. No missile tubes, no energy projectors, no defensive screens. This ship appears to be completely unarmed." Davis frowned as he processed this information. In his experience, only 2 types of ships traveled through deep space without weapons. Either they were so advanced that they did not need weapons, or they were so weak that weapons would not help them. He was beginning to suspect these aliens fell into the second category. Meanwhile, aboard the dying research vessel, Harmony's Edge Captain Kethva stared at her sensor readings with growing horror. 5 massive ships were approaching her position, and every scan revealed more details that filled her with dread. The vessels were clearly military in design, with heavy armor and weapon systems that could level entire cities. "Science officer." Morden worked frantically at his station trying to analyze the approaching fleet, while their ship's power continued to fail around them. His large eyes were wide with fear as he studied the sensor data, and his hands shook as he input commands into his console. "Captain, these ships are designed entirely for warfare," Morden reported in a voice tight with panic. "I am reading fusion reactors powerful enough to support energy weapons that could destroy our entire homeworld. Their armor is at least 50 times thicker than anything in the Federation fleet." Kethva felt her blood turn cold as she absorbed this information. The Zalari had always known that dangerous species existed in the galaxy, but they had never encountered any of them directly. Their peaceful nature and advanced diplomatic skills had allowed them to avoid contact with the more aggressive races that populated the outer regions of space. "What do their ship designs? Tell us about their species," she asked. Morden consulted his xenobiology database before answering. "Based on the construction patterns and weapon placement, I would estimate these beings evolved from predatory carnivores. The ships are built for sustained combat operations and show evidence of regular battle damage that has been repaired multiple times. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed the implications of this analysis. They had sent out a distress call hoping to attract peaceful explorers or traders, but instead they had drawn the attention of what appeared to be a military armada from a warrior species. Communications officer. Veltar looked up from his station with tears forming in his large eyes. Captain, I am receiving a transmission from the lead vessel. They appear to be trying to establish communication, but their language is completely unknown to our translation systems. Can you make out anything from their message? Cathava asked. They are using mathematical constants as a base language which suggests high intelligence, Veltar replied. But their communication style is very direct and aggressive compared to Federation standard protocols. I believe they are demanding that we identify ourselves. Dr. Patricia Wells worked at her station aboard the USS Liberty, trying to decode the alien language with the help of her xenobiology team. She was Earth's leading expert on alien communication and had spent years developing protocols for first contact situations. But this was proving to be more difficult than she had expected. Admiral, their language appears to be based on musical tones and harmonic frequencies, Wells reported to Morrison. It's incredibly complex and beautiful, but completely unlike anything in our databases. I'm having trouble establishing even basic mathematical communication. Morrison stood behind her chair watching the translation attempts on her screen. He had fought alien species before, but those had been hostile encounters where communication consisted mostly of weapons fire. This was his first attempt at peaceful contact with a new species, and he was determined not to make any mistakes. Keep trying, Doctor, Morrison said. These people called for help, and we're going to give it to them whether we can talk to them or not. Lieutenant Sam Parker was a young communications specialist who had joined the fleet fresh out of the academy. He had studied xenolinguistics as a hobby and was fascinated by the challenge of decoding this alien language. While the senior officers worked on the main translation effort, Parker was running his own analysis on a secondary terminal. Dr. Wells, I think I found something, Parker called out excitedly. Their distress call used very simple mathematical concepts, but their regular communications are much more complex. If we respond using the same simple mathematical base they used in their emergency message, they might understand us better. Wells quickly implemented Parker's suggestion and sent a basic mathematical response to the alien vessel. The message was simple but clear, indicating that the human ships had received the distress call and were approaching to offer assistance. The response from the alien ship came immediately, and it was not what anyone expected. The translation programs finally managed to decode the message, and the words appeared on the bridge screens for everyone to read. Please do not harm us. We have no weapons. We surrender. Morrison stared at the message in complete bewilderment. His fleet had come to rescue these beings, but they seemed to think the humans were there to attack them. He looked around his bridge at the confused faces of his officers and realized that this first contact was not going according to anyone's expectations. Doctor, what do you make of this? Morrison asked Wells. Wells studied her xenobiology readings before responding. Sir, based on their ship design and communication patterns, I believe we may be dealing with a completely pacifist species. They appear to have no concept of military assistance or rescue operations. To them, our heavily armed warships must look like an invasion fleet. Morrison rubbed his forehead as he considered this unprecedented situation. He had come to save lives, but the aliens he was trying to help were terrified of his ships and crew. Somehow he needed to convince them that humanity had come as friends, not enemies. Admiral Morrison stared at the alien surrender message displayed on his bridge screen and felt a deep confusion settling over him like a heavy blanket. In his 40 years of military service, he had never encountered a situation quite like this one. Every species humanity had met before had either been friendly traders or hostile enemies, but these aliens seemed to be something entirely different. Dr. Patricia Wells worked frantically at her xenobiology station, trying to make sense of the cultural implications of what they were seeing. Her screen showed detailed scans of the alien vessel, and every reading confirmed her growing suspicions about the nature of these beings. Admiral, I need to show you something important, Wells said as she transferred her analysis to the main tactical display. Look at the construction of their ship. There are no weapon mounts, no armor plating, no defensive systems of any kind. This vessel was never designed for combat. Morrison studied the technical readouts with growing amazement. The alien ship was beautiful in its elegant simplicity, but it was also completely defenseless. Even civilian human vessels carried basic defensive systems, but this ship had nothing that could be used as a weapon. "What about their crew quarters?" Morrison asked. "Can you tell us anything about the beings aboard that ship?" Wells brought up new data on her screens showing the internal layout of the alien vessel. "Sir, their living spaces are designed for a herbivorous species with no aggressive tendencies. I'm reading botanical laboratories, hydroponic gardens, and what appears to be meditation chambers. These beings appear to be scientists and explorers, not warriors." Lieutenant Sam Parker looked up from his communication station with excitement clear in his young features. He had been working on decoding more of the alien language and was beginning to understand some troubling patterns in their vocabulary. "Dr. Wells, I think I know why they surrendered to us," Parker said. "I've been analyzing their language structure, and I'm finding some very interesting gaps in their vocabulary. They don't seem to have words for many concepts that we take for granted." "What kind of concepts?" Wells asked. Parker consulted his translation notes before answering. "They have no word that translates to soldier or warrior or military. They have no terms for weapons or combat or defense. It's like their entire language evolved without any need for those concepts." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand what Parker was suggesting. These aliens had never developed the vocabulary of war because they had never needed it. They were looking at humanity's warships with no context for understanding that military vessels could be used for rescue operations. Meanwhile, aboard the Harmonies, Edge Captain Kethva gathered her senior staff in the ship's small conference room to discuss their desperate situation. The elegant chamber was filled with soft bioluminescent light from the living walls, and the air smelled of flowers from the integrated garden. Systems Duct Science Officer Morden spread his sensor readings across the holographic display table showing the human fleet in detailed technical specifications. The 5 warships hung in space like massive predators waiting to strike, and their weapon systems were clearly visible even to untrained eyes. "The lead vessel appears to be some kind of mobile military base," Morden explained to the assembled officers. "It's large enough to carry thousands of warriors and has launch bays for smaller attack craft. The escort ships are clearly designed for ship-to-ship combat and planetary bombardment." Healer Nithka was the ship's medical officer, and she studied the human vessels with the clinical eye of someone trained to preserve life. Her gentle nature made it difficult for her to comprehend beings who built such destructive machines. "What kind of species creates weapons capable of destroying entire worlds?" she asked in the musical tones of her people. "Even the most aggressive predators in nature only kill what they need to survive." Communications Officer Veltar had been monitoring the human transmissions, and his translation programs were slowly making progress on decoding their language. What he was learning about these aliens filled him with even more fear than their warships had. "Captain, I have disturbing news about these beings," Veltar reported. "From what I can understand of their communications, they refer to themselves as humans and they come from a world they call Earth. Their language is filled with words for violence and conflict that we don't even have concepts for." Kethva listened to these reports with growing despair. Her crew was trapped aboard a dying ship with no weapons and no shields while 5 military vessels from a warrior species surrounded them. She had to assume that the humans planned to take prisoners, or perhaps conduct some kind of scientific experiments on captured aliens. Back aboard the USS Liberty, Dr. Wells was making her own disturbing discoveries about the communication breakdown between the 2 species. Her xenobiology training had taught her to look for cultural patterns in alien behavior, and what she was finding suggested these beings were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. "Admiral, I think we're dealing with what I would classify as ultra-pacifists," Wells reported. "Based on their ship design language patterns and behavior, I believe this species has never experienced warfare at any point in their evolutionary history." Morrison tried to wrap his mind around this concept, but found it almost impossible to understand. Every species humanity had met in space had evolved some form of combat capability, even if they were primarily peaceful. The idea of a species that had never known war was completely foreign to human experience. "How is that possible?" Morrison asked. "Every intelligent species has to compete for resources. Competition leads to conflict, and conflict leads to the development of military capabilities. Wells consulted her xenobiology databases before responding. Sir, it's theoretically possible if a species evolved on a world with abundant resources and no major predators. If they never had to fight for survival, they might develop along completely different lines than humanity did. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Amanda Foster had been listening to this conversation with growing concern. As a doctor, she had spent her career trying to heal the wounds that war inflicted on human soldiers, and the idea of a species that had never known such suffering both amazed and worried her. If they've never experienced violence, then our very presence here must be terrifying to them, Foster said. To beings like that, our warships would look like instruments of pure evil. Morrison realized that he was facing a crisis unlike any he had dealt with before. These aliens needed help, but they were too frightened of humanity's military nature to accept it. Somehow he needed to convince a species that had never known war that his warriors had come to save them, not harm them. Colonel Kevin Torres was the senior Marine officer aboard the Liberty, and he had been quietly listening to the bridge discussions while planning possible boarding operations. Torres was a practical man who understood both the necessities of combat and the importance of protecting innocent lives. Admiral, if I may make a suggestion, Torres said. These beings are afraid of us because they don't understand that soldiers can be protectors as well as fighters. Maybe we need to show them instead of trying to explain it. Admiral Morrison made the most difficult decision of his military career as he stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, watching the dying alien vessel drift helplessly in space. The Zalari ship was running out of time, and despite their fear of humanity, these innocent beings would die if he did not act quickly. All ships power down all weapon systems and activate external lighting arrays. Morrison ordered over the fleet communication channel. I want every gun barrel covered and every missile tube sealed. We're going to make ourselves look as non-threatening as possible. Commander Rick Davis acknowledged the order from the bridge of the USS Freedom, but he could not hide his concern about leaving his ship defenseless in unknown space. Every instinct he had developed through years of combat told him that disarming his vessel was dangerous, but he trusted Morrison's judgment completely. Sir, are you sure about this? Davis asked over the private command channel. We don't know if there are other hostile forces in this system. Morrison understood Davis's concerns, but he knew they had no choice if they wanted to save the aliens. Rick, these people are dying and they're too scared of us to accept help. We have to show them that we're not here to hurt them. Dr. Patricia Wells worked with Lieutenant Sam Parker to compose a new message to the alien vessel using the simplest possible language and mathematical concepts. They needed to communicate their peaceful intentions, but they had to do it in a way that beings with no military experience could understand. Try explaining that we are healers and fixers, Wells suggested to Parker as he worked on the translation. Use concepts related to medical care and repair work, rather than military terminology. Parker nodded as he inputted the message using basic mathematical relationships and simple pictographs. The transmission went out to the Zalari ship carrying humanity's desperate attempt to bridge the gap between two completely different ways of thinking about the universe. Aboard the Harmony's Edge, Captain Kethva watched in amazement as the human warships began to change before her eyes. The threatening weapon systems were being covered with metal plates, and the harsh military lighting was being replaced with softer illumination that made the vessels look less intimidating. Communications Officer Veltar received the new human message and worked quickly to decode its meaning with the help of the ship's translation systems. What he found gave him the first hope he had felt since the crisis began. Captain, the humans are saying they are medical personnel and repair specialists, Veltar reported with excitement in his voice. They claim they want to fix our ship and heal our injured crew members. Science Officer Morden studied the human fleet through his sensors and confirmed that they were indeed making changes to their appearance. Captain, I am reading significant power reductions in their weapon systems. It appears they are actually disarming themselves. Kethva felt a flicker of hope as she processed this information. Perhaps these strange beings were not the predators she had feared. But her species had no experience with warriors, who could also be healers, and she found it difficult to understand how the same beings could create such destructive ships and then use them for rescue. Operations Commander Helen Rodriguez was chosen. to lead the human rescue team because of her experience with civilian evacuations and her calm diplomatic manner. She stood in the shuttle bay of the USS Liberty watching her carefully selected team prepare for what might be the most important mission of their careers. Chief Petty Officer Danny Wright was a veteran damage control specialist who had kept human ships operational under enemy fire for over 20 years. His expertise in emergency repairs had saved countless lives, and now he would use those same skills to help an alien species that had never known. Remember people, these beings have never seen soldiers before. Rodriguez addressed her team. Every move we make, every word we speak has to show them that we're here to help, not to hurt. We are representatives of all humanity in this moment. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos was included on the team because of her experience in disaster relief operations on human colonies. She had spent years pulling survivors from collapsed buildings and burning ships, and she understood the delicate balance between urgency and gentleness that rescue work required. Dr. Amanda Foster prepared her medical equipment for treating alien physiology with the help of the translation data they had gathered from the Zalari communications. She had no idea what kind of injuries she might encounter, but she was determined to save every life she could. The human shuttle approached the alien vessel slowly and carefully, with all weapon systems removed and emergency medical symbols prominently displayed on its hull. Rodriguez piloted the craft with extreme caution, knowing that any sudden movement might terrify the beings they were trying to help. Captain Kethva made the hardest decision of her life as she watched the human shuttle dock with her ship. Her crew was dying and their vessel was falling apart around them, but accepting help from these strange warriors felt like inviting predators into her home. "Open the docking bay," she ordered with resignation in her voice. "We will trust these humans because we have no other choice." The first meeting between the two species took place in the Harmony's Edge docking bay, with both sides approaching each other with extreme caution. The humans moved slowly and kept their hands visible, while the Zalari watched from a safe distance with their large eyes wide with fear. Rodriguez removed her helmet to show her human face and spoke in the gentlest voice she could manage, while the translation systems converted her words into the musical tones of the Zalari language. "We are here to help you," she said simply. "Your ship sent a call for rescue and we came to save your lives." Healer Nithka was the first Zalari to approach the humans, because her medical training told her that some of her crew members would die without immediate treatment. She studied the strange beings with their predator eyes and muscular bodies built for violence, but she also noticed the gentle way they moved and the concern in their expressions. Chief Petty Officer Wright began examining the damage to the alien ship and was amazed by the elegant engineering he found. The vessel was dying because of a cascade failure in its bioorganic systems, but the same living technology that was failing also made repairs incredibly complex. "Ma'am, this is the most beautiful ship I've ever seen," Wright told Rodriguez as he studied the flowing lines and integrated biological components. "It's like trying to perform surgery on a living creature instead of fixing a machine." Dr. Foster worked with healer Nithka to treat injured crew members and found herself learning as much as she was teaching. The Zalari had developed medical techniques based on harmony and natural healing that were completely different from human combat medicine, but equally effective in their own way. As the hours passed, both species began to understand each other better. The Zalari realized that these humans were not monsters, but rather beings who had learned to fight in order to protect others. The humans discovered a species so peaceful and innocent that they had never needed to develop the harsh edges that war had given to humanity. When part of the alien ship's superstructure suddenly collapsed during the repair work, Sergeant Santos did not hesitate to dive into the wreckage to pull out a trapped Zalari scientist, even though the debris could have crushed her at any moment. Captain Kethva watched in amazement as this human warrior risked her own life to save someone she had never met before. For the first time, she began to understand that humanity's capacity for violence was matched by an equally strong drive to preserve innocent life. The rescue operation was finally complete as the last of the Zalari crew members was safely transferred to the human medical frigate USS Mercy. Captain Kethva stood in the observation lounge aboard the Liberty, watching her beautiful ship Harmonies edge through the large viewing windows as human repair teams worked to stabilize its failing systems. Admiral Morrison joined her at the window, and both Leaders stood in comfortable silence for several minutes before beginning what would become the most important conversation in galactic history. Lieutenant Sam Parker served as translator, while Dr. Patricia Wells provided cultural context for the historic first contact between their species. "Your people saved us when they had no reason to help strangers," HFY said through the translation system. "I must admit that when we first saw your ships, we believed you had come to harm us because we did not understand that warriors could also be healers." Morrison nodded slowly as he considered his response. "Captain, your people called for help and we answered because that is what we do. It does not matter what species you are or where you come from. When someone needs rescue, we will always try to save them." Dr. Wells was fascinated by the cultural exchange that was taking place between the two leaders. Her xenobiology training had prepared her to study alien societies, but she had never imagined she would witness the first meeting between a warrior species and a completely peaceful civilization. "Admiral, may I ask you something that confuses me greatly?" HFY said. "Your ships are designed for destruction, and your people are trained for combat, yet you risk your lives to save others. How can the same beings create both war and mercy?" Morrison thought carefully about how to explain humanity's complex nature to a being who had never known conflict. "Captain, we learned long ago that the strong must protect the weak. Our weapons exist not to attack the innocent, but to defend them from those who would do harm." Meanwhile, in the medical bay of the USS Mercy, Dr. Amanda Foster worked alongside healer Nithka to treat the remaining injured Zalari crew members. The collaboration between human and alien medical techniques was producing remarkable results as each species learned from the other's approach to healing. "Your combat medicine is so different from our natural healing methods," Nithka observed as she watched Foster work. "You have learned to fix terrible injuries very quickly because your people often hurt each other in wars." Foster paused in her work to consider this observation. "That is true, but we also learned these techniques because we wanted to save lives. Even in the worst battles, we never stopped trying to heal the wounded." Science Officer Morden was aboard the Liberty working with the human technical teams to understand how their military technology could be adapted for peaceful purposes. Chief Petty Officer Danny Wright was showing him the damage control systems that had saved countless human ships during combat. "These repair techniques were developed during your wars," Morden said with wonder in his voice. "But they work perfectly for fixing our peaceful research vessel. You have turned the tools of conflict into instruments of preservation." Wright smiled as he watched the alien scientist examine the human equipment. "Son, everything we know about keeping ships alive in space came from trying to save our people when someone was shooting at us. Turns out the same skills work pretty well for helping folks who just had some bad luck." Communications Officer Veltar was working with Lieutenant Parker to establish a permanent communication link between the human fleet and the surviving Zalari systems. As they worked together, the young alien began to understand something profound about the humans who had saved his people. "Your language has so many words for violence and war, but it also has beautiful words for protection and sacrifice," Veltar observed. "You are a species of contradictions that somehow makes perfect sense." Parker grinned at this assessment. "I guess we learned how to fight so well because we had something worth fighting for. Family, friends, innocent people who could not protect themselves. The fighting was never the point, the protecting was." Captain HFY and Admiral Morrison were deep in conversation about their respective species when the Liberty's tactical officer suddenly called out an urgent warning that changed everything. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts approaching at high speed," the tactical officer reported. "Configuration matches Hectory Raider vessels and they appear to be armed for combat." Morrison's expression immediately hardened as he processed this information. The Hectory Raiders were among the most vicious species in known space, and they specialized in capturing peaceful civilizations to sell as slaves in the Outer Rim markets. "How many ships and how long until they reach us?" Morrison asked. 12 vessels, sir, and they will be in weapons range in 40 minutes, came the reply. HFY watched in fascination as the humans around her transformed from gentle healers back into warriors in the space of a few heartbeats. The same people who had risked their lives to save her crew were now preparing to risk those lives again, to protect them from a new threat. "Admiral, what are these Hectory Raiders?" HFY asked. Dr. Wells consulted her xenobiology database before answering. "Captain, the Hectory are slave traders who prey on peaceful species like yours. They must have detected the distress signals and come to capture your people. Morrison turned to face Kethva with grim determination in his eyes. Captain, I need you to understand something very important. These raiders are exactly the kind of predators that my people exist to stop. We will not let them harm you or your crew. But you could leave and save yourselves, Kethva said with confusion. Why would you fight dangerous enemies to protect strangers? Morrison smiled grimly as he prepared to show the Zalari exactly why humanity had earned its place in the galaxy. Captain, that is not who we are. We do not abandon people who need our protection, especially people as decent and innocent as your species. The Bridge of the Liberty became a hive of activity as the crew prepared for battle. Morrison issued orders to his fleet while keeping one eye on the approaching enemy ships and another on the aliens he had sworn to protect. All ships battle stations, Morrison commanded. We have innocents to defend and raiders to stop. Let's show these Hectori what happens when they threaten people under our protection. Captain Kethva watched in awe as the human fleet moved into defensive formation around her damaged vessel. She finally understood that she had not contacted the wrong species at all. When peaceful beings needed protection from the darkness of space, humanity was exactly the right species to answer their call. The final message she sent to the Zalari. Federation would change the course of galactic history. This is Captain Kethva reporting first contact with the humans of Earth. We are no longer defenseless. The galaxy now has guardians.